And so when we're working with the archetype and the planetary pair of the Moon and Saturn, when we work with it from a phasal point of view, it's going to describe to us how many lifetimes we have been working upon the development of our own self-image to then put it out there in the world. And it will then also give us some more clues with the whole archetypes of mom and dad and how they're impacting upon us and what effects they have on us. And also, the Moon and Saturn and these archetypes we've been talking about, the planet on the 4th house, the planet on the 10th house, because this is traditionally a water sign and known as the moon and the nurturing. It's feminine energy. This is known as more masculine energy. This also then starts to bring in this whole concept of anima animus. And so what happens, go ahead.
Capricorn's a feminine sign.
Yes, Capricorn's a feminine sign too. As we've come through astrology, and we know this is being able to go out there in the world and take charge in the world, the cardinal part of it makes it, you know, starts lending it to the masculine energy. But that's the whole thing to really learn about Cancer Capricorn and anima animus, is learning to be able to balance both of those. Because what happens for us souls when we incarnate, we have to choose a gender. We have to choose to come in one or the other. And what we can do is with souls who are not as expanded in consciousness, in the consensus world, they can come in the same gender again and again and again and again and again until they wear it out and they're forced to flip over to the opposite gender. And you know how you see those masculine women and the feminine men? Many times that's a soul who switched gender recently. And so they want to go back to the other gender, you know, or they have so many characteristics of that other gender because they're so comfortable with it and they're in process of switching it back, you know, trying to learn. Because what happens as we expand in consciousness through these different genders, as we are expanding in consciousness through many lifetimes, we're learning to balance and equalize those two genders so we carry both our masculine and feminine within us. We always do. But the conditionings of society make us choose one. Boys don't get to cry. Girls got to stay home. You know, Jeffrey would always use the Betty Crocker Marble Man scenarios. You know, we've kind of moved beyond those now, and especially those Pluto and Libras, you know, they're going to bring in both of those genders wanting to, you know, balance them out. But as souls are expanding in consciousness, they can flip back and forth between the two genders easier and easier and easier and easier. I was a male my last time around. And he was female, and we flipped. Last time around, I was the husband, he was the wife. No. As you expand in consciousness and you're moving into individuating, and especially as you're moving into spirituating, it's not always an absolute, but for the most part, you learn how to be able to flip back and forth with those genders easier and easier. And you learn to come in with one gender and you can experience both your feminine and masculine no matter which gender. And as a matter of fact, your most evolved souls on the planet, we don't have too many modern examples. Yogananda would probably be the most common example. If you look at Yogananda, is he a male or a female? So as we really expand in consciousness, what we end up doing is become androgynous. And the last separating desire we exhaust is the sexual desire. Only 2% of the people on the planet are naturally celibate. And so as we naturally exhaust that separating desire called sexuality, and as we've learned to come through all these experiences and balance it out, we become androgynous. Okay, the whole purpose of homosexuality is loving a soul first, body second, and learning to experience androgyny. And all souls will go through that over this long course of lifetimes. Again, lots I can say on these subjects, but I'm trying to just encapsulate little tidbits for you, all right? So the moon and Saturn are going to represent that anima animus. And where we get this anima and where Cancer comes in to be the feminine is because it's that inner emotional self-image that we're working through, the inner security. And then up here, the animus is how we go out there with the outer security and do it. Okay, so that's another way of where we can get the feminine masculine with that. And so the phasal relationship between the moon and Saturn is going to just show us more clues as to where we are in any situation or any lifetime in working through our anima animus issues and working through our emotional self-reliance to then take it out there in the world. All right? Quickly using this example here, Saturn is the slower moving planet. This soul has Saturn down here in the 4th house at 20 degrees Virgo. 20 degrees Libra, 20 degrees Scorpio, 20 degrees Sag, 20 degrees Capricorn is 120 degrees. That's the waxing trine. Hers is at 15. It's 115 degrees. So it's within an orb of the waxing trine or the first quarter trine, but it is applying towards that. It's 115 degrees. As we move through that, first of all, the phasal relationship, the first quarter, that tells us that there's been some manifestation of learning to balance that masculine-feminine energy. And as we move to the trine, what does the trine tell us? The harmonics of the Trinity, that there is a balancing of energy. So this is telling us that there is some ability here for this soul to balance whatever feminine, masculine issues they are working through. All right? Make sense with that? They happen to both be in earth signs, water houses. Now here's where we can start to go get some more clues in regards to this early self-imaging and conditioning environment. Because Saturn will more traditionally relate to what we call the authoritarian planet. Could we get some clues here that perhaps one of the planets in Virgo, or one of the parents, could have been more critical? Could there have been some environment in the early self-imaging where, you know, parents felt that they were being nurturing and loving, 4th house, but perhaps the soul involved started, you know, felt that they were criticized. Very sensitive. Could be very sensitive to criticism from the parents, one or both parents. All right? And this could be, if this could be put nurturing energy to father, right here. Because you have Saturn in the moon house. Okay? And it could also give us clues that it would be very important for the soul to develop their self-image, 4th house, in order to really be productive out there in the world, Saturn, Virgo. Okay? This could also be a signature that there might be some confusion because Saturn is in the moon's house. There could be some types of confusion in the messages between mom and dad. What if, for instance, father was more nurturing and loving and mother was more authoritarian? They did not follow the natural roles, so there could be some confusion around, you know, gender issues. Yet because the moon is a waxing trine from Saturn, this soul was able to work their way through it and able to have some degree of probably psychological ability or emotional ability to process through and understand. Okay? Not all mothers are critical. Not all fathers are necessarily nurturing. But these were mine. You know.
It's interesting that she's got the moon in Capricorn, having Saturn in the 4th house. That's like another...
There's another flip. There's another flip. So are we starting to get some repeating clues in here that this soul, in their own way, is trying to figure out some balancing of masculine and feminine energy. Yep, definitely. What do you have when you have Moon in Capricorn in Scorpio? Sometimes suppression of deep emotions. It's not safe to be emotional. Okay? Take that back to Leo on the 4th house cusp. And this could be a soul who, as a young child, when those emotions got aroused, and they were just like, you know, exploding out of her, no one was there to recognize it. Perhaps criticized. And then, therefore, re-imprinting. It's not safe to show my emotions. I better suppress them all over again. And yet, as time went on and this soul matured, the waxing trine of the Moon to Saturn, this soul was going, wait a minute, it's not natural to suppress your emotions. You relate to that?
Yeah, my family wasn't very expressive. And unless it was like, it's extremes kind of thing, like all built up and then.
Pshoo. And then reinforcing that unpredictable environment that was, you know, the family unit. Yeah.
We're in a Scorpio with that explosive emotional energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what else? Anybody else? So you would want to look at your Sun, at your Moon-Saturn phasal relationship. And one of the areas where Jeffrey Green did a lot of research early on for many years was, today we call it the LBGT, is that, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, okay? Jeffrey did a lot of research back in the days when it wasn't so common, and what he found is that whenever the Moon started getting into the balsamic relationship to Saturn, meaning anywhere from 315 to 360 degrees, that could be an indicator of either homosexuality, was not an absolute, so don't take it that way, but it was the soul finishing up the gender they were in and getting ready to flip over. If you see Pluto in Cancer or Capricorn, if you see the nodes in Cancer or Capricorn, if you see planets in the 4th or 10th, if you see Cancer or Capricorn on the ascendant, descendant, several indicators of perhaps gender switching. Either they've just switched genders and they're coming in, or it could be an indicator of finishing up and needing to switch genders. And you have to do the observe correlate. Okay?
So would you say that that was like a first time around switching genders
No.
indication, or just could be?
We flip back and forth so many times, you don't want to count.
But you said when you're more spirituated that you just do it easy.
It's easier to flip back and forth.
So when somebody then is in a balsamic phase and they're about to switch.
That can happen any evolutionary state.
Okay.
Yep.
Easier for some and harder for others.
Yes. Yes. Yep. And it can also be harder because, you know, for instance, let's take a female, and she's quite aware but carrying that masculine energy. She could have had so many lifetimes of abuse as a female that she's forced to come back in this lifetime to start addressing those issues, and she doesn't want to deal with anything. And sometimes a possible signature of that is a woman who has a 10th house Pluto. You know, and so that 10th house Pluto up there is, you know, I can do it, I'm in charge. But that polarity point is the 4th house, and that woman's going, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go into that emotional body. You know, so she has to come back as a female by evolutionary necessity to start working through those lessons. Same thing with a man. You know, you can flip that around. Give a guy a Pluto in the 4th house, you know, and can be very sensitive. And, you know, he'd rather be female, but he's got to start learning how to function and how to take charge of his masculine side. There's many variables. There's many, many variables. But everything that we're working with parent-child dynamics is also dynamics for anima-animus issues. Okay? How we're integrating our feminine side and masculine side. And so we see multiple signatures here with Michelle's chart, but what we've also got is, you know, here's Saturn in the feminine, here's the moon in the masculine. The waxing trine is a big clue for us that there is an ability to integrate those anima-animus issues, whatever they are. Because the 120-degree mark, the waxing trine, we've come through that 90 degree of manifestation crises in action, at 90 degrees, and by the 120 we're like, oh, this is it, I get it, I understand, I can figure it out. That's the 0 degree Leo at the 120 degree mark. And so there's an ease of psychologically understanding at the 120 degree mark. So this more or less could be someone who's learning to, you know, here's my feminine side, here's my masculine side, here's where I've got to work with my emotional body, here's where I got to work with my masculine side, Pluto in Libra, you know, and start to get some of those clues there. Okay? So, many variables. All right? Let's do just another quick little example here so I can work with this Saturn-Moon stuff, all right? So somebody else that we haven't worked with yet, I just want you to give me your, anybody? Okay? What sign's on your 4th house cusp? All right, and so that puts us Gemini up here. Where's your moon?
3rd house in Scorpio.
3rd?
Yeah.
Where's your Saturn?
12th house in Leo.
Okay, let's just work with these archetypes, okay? What would happen if you put Sag on the 4th house cusp? What could be the early nurturing environment? Travel. Okay. Maybe, yep, there could be a lot of travel.
Consensus related, is that?
It would depend on the evolutionary state. You could put Sag here and you could have very spiritual parents who recognized how important it was to nurture the early environment. But Sag is a fire sign on all this emotional stuff. You know, big girls don't cry. Get over it. You know, that Sag quickness, that Sag philosophical stuff. You know, I don't understand why you're crying. You know, how do you feel this worked for you?
I don't know. It certainly wasn't that what you just said.
Okay. What was your early environment like? Got mom and dad?
I had mom and dad. They divorced when I was very young, too.
Do you have multiracial parents?
Yes.
There you go. Sag Gemini. Okay. They divorced when you were very young?
Yep.
Okay. Who'd you end up with?
Mom.
Okay. What was mom like?
She she was very nurturing, and yet she was also in my structure. She took care of me. She was pretty much the one that was responsible, but very nurturing at the same time. I remember life being pretty pleasant with her.
That can be. That can be Sag. That can be playful. The playfulness of the fire signs. You know, the larger picture, philosophical. You know, you put Sag on this, and you've also got someone who's going to try and understand what the emotions are and what emotions are going on. You know, Sagittarius also always wants to understand things conceptually. And so you could, you know, again, someone who would talk to the child about the emotions.
That was her, always wanting to know what was going on, what I was feeling.
What happened with Dad? Where's Dad? Did Dad just disappear?
No,
or?
he was in my life. He was very much in my life. I went with him every weekend, and he was also very nurturing, but also an alcoholic, not very responsible.
Gemini up there.
What'd you say?
12th house.
Yeah,
Yep, Saturn in Leo.
yeah, but very fun. Like I always thought of him as like a great time. You know, like,
Saturn in Leo.
yeah.
Gemini up there on you know, the 10th house. This isn't, you know, you put any of the air signs up there on the 10th house or even on the 4th house, you know, all the air signs can be unpredictable to some degree. You know, Gemini is all the variety. You know, it was like, where is structure?
Yeah.
Is what could happen right here, okay? You could have had that inner philosophical structure, okay? And if it was strong enough, it would allow you to be as adaptable as possible out there in the world, okay?
Yeah.
Another way that this type of archetype could come through, but it's not this one, you could have had all the fundamentalism of Sagittarius, whether it was religious or whether it's just the way the family operates. And so then that means you had no choice. Gemini can be a lack of choice when it's distorted. Okay? And so, but in her case, you know, it sounds like there was some nurturing. Okay? And Mom would always want to talk to her about it, help her understand that early emotional environment. Which, you know, then again, allowed her to go out here and operate in a variety of ways. Sometimes when you put something like Gemini Sag on the 4th, 10th, you know, we got a lightening up of that energy. And even though she's come through divorce, that's what she's describing, which was a different situation than some of the other parental environments that we were talking about or have had as examples here. Same thing with Mom down here. She's Moon in Scorpio, okay, which adds some emotional intensity to here and emotional betrayals of trust, but it lightens up in the 3rd house. It's like, oh, well, that was a storm that passed through, you know. You know, and so there could have been some, you know, again, we're taking this emotional energy and we're learning how to be adaptable with it. These are mutable signs. So it kind of means, you know, go with the flow. Whereas we put the Leo and the Aquarius in the fixed signs and it was, you know, fixed energy. This stuff is just kind of, here we go. This is how it works. This is the adventure. This is the story. Sag, Gemini. So we start to describe that. What else would you say? Would you say, so the questions that I would start to ask is, was there any traumas, emotional traumas from childhood?
From early childhood?
Were you raised with siblings?
Yes.
Where are you in birth order?
Well, I have an older half-sister, and so for early childhood, I'm going to just leave it there. I also have a younger half-brother, but he's 20 years younger than me.
Yeah, but that still fits with this Gemini 10th house cusp. Blended families. Yeah, yeah. And same thing with there if they're in the early environment. And so you were middle. How much older was the older sister?
3.5 years.
Okay, so that's still fairly close, that you were raised pretty much in the same environment. Are these square?
Yes. My moon and my Saturn. It doesn't have the red line, but
What degree is the moon?
the moon is 24.
What degree is Saturn?
12.
So it's 12 degrees past the square.
Okay.
So instead of 90, it's at 102 degrees. 102 degrees, minor aspects. That's the septile, right? 102 degrees is the septile, I think. Biseptile? Biseptile? The septiles are kind of like an element of fate to that aspect. And septiles are, if you have septiles in the chart, the waxing ones are self, the waning ones are others. And the waxing ones mean that the soul reaches this Y in the road. And it's almost like the certain experiences and people show up to help them choose the path the soul wants to go. So when it's a waxing, septile, biseptile, and I think there's a triseptile, if I remember, that might be the halfway mark. That's when the soul is figuring it out themselves. And if it's on the waning side, that means the people show up. Okay?
Is that why you said Groundhog's Day earlier is over there? Because it's like, it's deciding whether winter's going to go away or not?
Oh, that's a whole nother subject. I mean, that's that cross-quarter area at 15 Aquarius where we would predict the future. And really, what are they doing? Doesn't matter whether the sun's shining or not, it's still 6 weeks away. That's the human-made conditioning on something that was used as a sacred casting of the future. So, different thing. Different thing. But 90 and 12, 102, yeah. So we're past the crises in action here, okay, of integrating that emotional body out there in the world and integrating your anima animus. And so, again, it's almost like you go through those situations in life with that biseptile where things show up in your life that are just helpful in helping you balance that masculine, feminine, your inner, outer. And it's also going to relate to this Sag Gemini. It's not as heavy this time around. You feel that?
I definitely feel it. And yet to say, I've certainly been through crisis.
Oh, we all do, yes.
But yes, I feel like I'm content a lot of the time. Maybe some more than others.
Which is helping lighten up all the Scorpio stuff. Because that moon in Scorpio will bring around those intensities
and that's
sometimes.
intense when it's intense. Like
Yes.
Really
Yes.
get deep.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The Gemini point of, the third house Gemini, where it's like flipping that switch. And the Scorpio streams of flipping that switch are, it's either light or it is, that starts to come in. Questions with anything that you want to?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess it seems to me, since both parents were somewhat nurturing, I feel like.
Yes?
Could they both be nurturing?
Yes?
And both be a little bit structured?
Yes?
Okay. That's pretty much it.
Yep. This can, Sag is not only the adventure, it lightens it up. That's, the intensity of when we have Pluto and Scorpio and then we moved into Pluto and Sag. It was the difference. If you had a uh-oh. Yeah, I heard that.
Wow, right at the 30-minute mark too. It's kind of really interesting to watch.
Whew.
She was talking about lightening up.
I was talking about the difference between Scorpio and Sag.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. You guys didn't leave it.
Yeah. And so, and so there is a lot of difference. When we had Pluto in Scorpio, you had a moon in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, and Pluto went over him, and it was like, boom. But you had a moon in Sag or a Venus in Sag, and Pluto goes through them, and it's like, yeah, it's intense, but okay, I get it, I'll move on. You know, and that's what that Sag can do to that fourth house. But it really helped you with the philosophical understandings of all the emotional stuff that churns up within inside you. And it sounded like Mom and Dad were supportive of all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Would that contribute to comfort levels as far as living away from home? You know,
Yes. 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 You bet. You're welcome. You're welcome. Happy trails. Happy trails. Yes.
Some
Yes.
people feel like, I just have to be by my parents. Or I just
Yes.
have to be by where I grew up.
Yes. Yes. You put Sag Gemini there. This is the soul who, if the early environment was nurtured, can feel at home wherever she's at because she's internalized it. And it can also, again, you carry that home within you, or you make home wherever you are. Or this can be someone who sees Gaia as home, planet Earth as home. So you're recognizing everything about Gaia here, it nurtures you. So this can be a child who, when she's emotionally upset, wants to go out in nature. And it can be representative of someone who ends up living far away, ends up living in a different culture, ends up being more comfortable emotionally, fourth house, with a culture or a belief system or a race other than the one that you were born into. And when that's the case, it's the soul returning to what's natural for it, Sag. And then that is what allows for, duality, adaptability, flexibility, out there in the world. Able to integrate a lot of variety of circumstances, allowing, and that can lead into the work world with whatever you do out there in the work world. And so this can also then, if we flip it over to you, becoming a parent, okay, it's very important that you kind of carry on what Mother did, and being able to very philosophically look at anything that comes through emotionally. Well, everything is a process. There's a reason to everything. There's a reason you feel that way. Wanting to raise the child, wanting to raise your own children by natural law, Sag, rather than what our conditionings are around us. Okay? And so this can take that Gemini up there on the 10th house, and it can be indicative of, not doing things the typical way out there in the environment, out there in that outer world. The father of your child is which race?
White, Caucasian.
Okay, so that same thing then coming through again, you bringing through a multicultural child, a soul who's going to be attracted to that type of an opportunity, and we have some close friends at home, and they just had their third child after 8-9 year hiatus. And she's the most beautiful saying. She says, there is no race except the human race. We're all one race. And so children who were raised that way, you know, and that many times is that Gemini Sag energy of coming through, you know, and so being able to share that type of parenting yourself with your little one. Mm-hmm. All right, how we doing? Hang in, you hung in there. Any other questions, anything? That's what I'm about ready to feel complete for the moment. Well, thank all of you very much. I appreciate it very, very much. You are most welcome. This has been very fun for me. And so I hope this is helpful and beneficial to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep. Yep.